I hope that you will walk away and clarify that destination, maybe just in one area of your life. Just give it a try. Maybe it's as a mom, maybe it's a wife, maybe it's your spiritual life, maybe it's your health life. And remember that you want to identify as, I am a good mom. And because I am a good mom, and because I'm a spiritual mom, then this is where I want my kids to land the plane. Hey, I'm Megann Marcellino, and I want to welcome you back today to Generations at the Table. I'm super excited because I have a really special guest here today. Shannon has come in to talk to me about something that she often says or asks me is, where do you want to land this plane? She has worked with the ministry. Oh gosh, how long now?
7 or 8 years. Yeah.
7 or 8 years. And she helps so much, is the voice of the ministry in content creation and working on like a lot of what you may read in blogs or in written content and emails, and just helping us fine tune our messaging. But so many times we talk about, well, what is this piece for? And where do you want to land the plane? And what I thought was just so special about that question that I kept hearing her say was, how do we live our life with that same intentionality and purpose? How do we live our life in step with the destination that we want to go? How do we live our life in focus? Because see, we don't get there if we don't intend on getting there. Rabbi always says to me that it's so much better to do things on purpose than accidentally. And I think it's just an important exercise. You know, we take time in our businesses to have 10-year plans and 3-year plans and then 1-year plans, but those plans ultimately feed into one another, right? If you have a 10-year plan, then you know where your 3-year goal should be taking you, all moving in that direction. But sometimes I think we live our life a little haphazardly or a little bit on accident, or almost like victims of our circumstance or just whatever life may bring. But how can we live our life so that we land the plane in the spiritual and the physical destination that we want? What we're seeking, what our inner desire is. So Shannon is here today to talk to us about that and her great experience. So
Yes,
thank you for pulling up a seat at the table.
Yes, thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Okay. All right. So let's just jump right in. I mentioned that you help us with like content creation. And when I say help, you are a huge part of that voice and have been. And so you've done some experience like with the StoryBrand framework. And I know that kind of led to this like conversation. So can you talk to us a little bit about like what that is and kind of how you've seen ministries and businesses apply it by basically clarifying their mission and their end goal and their communication?
Yeah. So StoryBrand is a messaging framework or tool that anybody can use. And the idea of it is we are all in a story. We're all in a story of transformation. We are all, when you look at it from a spiritual perspective, God has a picture and a destination for us. And so when we step into our story and understand that we are being transformed into Christ, that problems and situations and circumstances will come our way, but those things aren't to be pushed away or even to distract us, but to be welcomed in a sense of, okay, God, what are you doing right now in me to transform me into what you see me as and who you see me as in you? And so StoryBrand is really taking that whole framework along with just like any story you also have a guide. You have somebody who walks alongside you that has walked the journey before you and is saying, I've got you. It's okay. That guide, the Holy Spirit, taking your hand and saying, we've got this. And I'm going to give you strategy and a plan. But I think, the first thing is really, when you apply this to your life, for example, is really asking the Lord, what do you have for me? And going back to his word and saying, as a mom, what do you have for me? As a daughter, what do you have for me? As a leader in a ministry or a business, what do you have for me? And allowing him to shape that destination for you.
Yes.
And then using StoryBrand is a way to say, okay, how can I kind of conceptualize this so that I don't get distracted with all the things that the world or the enemy or the culture want to throw at me to get me off course. So
I think that's so important that you emphasize the asking of the question, what do you have for me? because it's like, I think that that's so paramount in our reaching our journey, our true destination, not even what we want, but that calling, that purpose, that like spiritual identity that everyone is seeking. It's like, I want to know what I'm here for. Well, if you want to really know what you're here for, you need to know, like, what do you have for me?
Right.
Like, what have you called me? So when you say, where do you want to land this plane? That is like a clear and defined goal, kind of. That's part of like, I believe, like the StoryBrand process of clarification, right?
Right.
And so the goal is like, when we sit down from a work perspective, it's like, we're going to take this piece. Maybe it's going to be an email campaign, or maybe it's going to be a blog communication or a letter. But ultimately, we're trying to determine what we want the reader, like what we want their experience to be, and what at the end are we wanting them to do? How are we trying to fill their bucket? What is the end goal? And what I have learned from my role in the organization is there are so many of these business and ministry practices that really don't just apply to business and ministry. Like as we've gone through this together, it's like, man, this is such a spiritual principle. So how does this apply to me? Like, it's not just for business, it's personal too. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I think in business, again, when you enter into a story or a movie or, a book, there can be a lot of ways that you could get distracted from the storyline, right? And so when you come back to that anchor of where do I want to land this plane? And is this action that I'm about to take going to get me there, or is it going to pull me away? It goes back to the principle of taking every thought captive and making it obedient to Christ. Is it truly sowing into what my destiny is for the kingdom, or is it pulling me away? And those things, I was thinking about this also in a sense of as a mom, or as all these roles that we play, they're all different storylines. So as a mom, if I want to, where am I going to land my plane? Yeah. I'm thinking about where do I see my kids in 5 years? Right. And how can I raise them up and train them up so that is the goal, or that is the outcome of it. And it's not just, how do I get through today? And it can feel like that sometimes. But I think if you write them down and you start to pray into them, and every step of the way, surrendering, I literally picture me placing my children in the Father's hands and saying, they're yours. Every time I get stressed and think I'm going to orchestrate this situation to get the outcome I want. And really, I want to land the plane that they have a strong relationship with the Lord. And so how can I live that out? I need to exhibit it in my family. I need to cry out to the Father when I'm in need. I need to speak of Him in, when I rise and when I go to sleep, that I'm talking about what's happening, where's Jesus in this situation, and what He's doing. And so really, where you want to land this plane, you've got to get beyond just the situation and look if I were to go forward with this action, what is going to be the outcome? What's going to be the fruit of it? Am I going to cause more chaos, or am I getting to where I'm going to land that plane? Yeah. I think what is so important to me, what you identified there, is that we do need to choose that as parents. We need to choose that as a spouse. We need to choose that for our work, for our ministry, for our spiritual life, for our health, and realizing that those baby steps are part of our journey. They're part of our story. And like you said, are they taking us where we want to go? Are they a distraction? Are they detracting? Are they pulling back from? And I think what helps me with that is, it's like, sometimes I get overwhelmed. I've talked about this before. Sometimes I face decision fatigue. I don't know if it's just because of the roles that I'm in, or if it's just being a mom and a wife. I'm just like, please don't make me decide one more thing. Like a couple nights ago, Paul was going to make a salad. And I said, I don't care what you do. Just like do like a Greek or Italian focus. Like that's the dinner we're going for. Anything that fits in that, like go that direction. And he was like, well, he started asking me questions. Do you want cucumbers? Do you want tomatoes? And I was like,
babe, I don't care anything in the vein of Greek or Italian.
Right.
I was like, please don't make me decide. Just make a salad, please. And it was like I just hit that wall. But when we have like this, where we want to land the plane, what we want for our end destination of, let's just say like our spiritual life, I want to be known as this. I want to be remembered as this. I want to, then it's like these decisions become more clear, because it's like, if I do this thing or I don't do this thing, if I show up for the feast of the Lord, I am feeding that desire to be one who shows up when God calls.
Right.
I am feeding that. I am putting my feet into the Father's table. I am feeding a lifestyle of obedience. I am feeding a lifestyle of being present for God's divine appointments. And if I choose not to, then that pulls away from that identity of I am one who like embraces a one new man culture. I'm one new humanity, like that, the roots. It pulls away from that. So it's like, okay, this is the consequence. And so Rabbi's been talking a lot about identity-based habits versus just like doing habits, like embracing, I do this because I am a child of God.
Yes.
Or I do this because I am a healthy person, whether that's spiritual or physical. And I think that that's, like when you know your destination or you know your end goal, that impacts your identity of who you are.
Yes.
Okay, so what are a couple practical steps that we can take from the whole like StoryBrand framework and apply to our lives and say, okay, I'm going to live on purpose, and more intentionally with like a clarified life mission?
Yeah. Two things come to mind. One of those, and I mentioned writing down. Write down what, and well, really three, starting with the question of asking the Lord, where are you taking me? What do you want me to learn in this season? Almost like you are a child sitting at the feet of the Father, asking him all the questions, knowing he's not human where he's going to be annoyed that you're asking him all the questions, right? Like he welcomes that and he's smiling at me as I'm asking him because I'm hungry and I want to walk in what he has for me. And so asking the question, writing down, even if it's, sometimes I just have a blank sheet of paper and it's just random words on there. That's just, this is what I heard. I don't know exactly what that is, Lord, but I'm going to start praying into it. Just like you were saying, I am a child, and just start praying into it. You might not understand it at first and just say, I am a child, but Lord, teach me what that looks like, and trusting he will through those problems that we all face, that transform us to not shy away from the problems, even if we get pulled off and distracted in some areas, knowing, okay, God, every morning I'm going to wake up and I'm going to ask you, what do you have for me today? And just keep bringing it back to him and saying, okay, I don't know if I'm on track, teach me if I'm not, and to constantly surrender it to him and to ask him in that problem, what do you want to teach me? There's something about my character that you're bringing me into, that you're shaving away, that you are, shining more light upon. What do you want to teach me? So asking the questions, writing down the words, the things that come to mind, and then praying into those things and saying, is this from me, or is this my flesh, or is this you? And trusting. And I think those are really easy, practical steps. It's simple, not easy. Because it's not always easy to be mindful.
But it is applicable.
But it is
applicable.
You can do. Yes.
Something I'd love to pull on a little bit more is you mentioned the word like problems and challenges. These last couple podcasts I've been talking about, seeing the giants versus seeing the opportunity and seeing the promise of God. But like, I think that something that's happened to me in the last couple of years is I have had a change in my belief system, in that I used to think that if I was walking through something and there was not a lot of grace, if there was a lot of hard things and it felt like an uphill climb, well, that probably represented that the hand of God was not on it, and it was not being favored of God, and I was probably outside of the will of the Lord or under the attack of the enemy. Like that was just like, that's just kind of what I believed. And in the last couple of years, I've come to see that sometimes I can be trying to do something that I really do feel like is part of my life assignment, and yet it's hard. And in the last podcast, I think I talked about how hard and good are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
But so now I realize that just because something's hard doesn't mean it's not what's best for me. It doesn't even mean that God's favor is not on it. He's using this moment to refine me.
Yes.
Which is more important than me getting through the easy way out, even though I'd like the easy button.
Yes.
So let's talk about identifying or clarifying a problem on our journey and then owning it and addressing it. Because part of the StoryBrand framework is that you kind of you identify a challenge that someone might be, and then you help guide them through. So how do we do that in our own life? Can you bring any clarity to that?
Yeah, I think one of the word that came to mind when you were talking is one of David. David had an anointing on his life. He had an assignment, and yet there was somebody that had the assignment before him.
Yeah.
And he had to wait. And in that waiting, in that problem, I mean, there was tons of problems he was going through.
Yes.
Humility. And so when there's a problem, or even, the adultery that he committed, he owned it. And when you own it, it opens up, and you repent, and you own it, you repent, and you're humble in it. And then God uses that to teach you to have compassion, so that then you are going to lead someone else through that. That's where that guide part comes in, where you can't really walk out your assignment until you've been transformed.
Right.
And then looking for opportunities of someone else who seems to be going through the same journey you went through 5-10 years ago. And then you get to humbly walk beside them, not looking at it as I'm an expert in all the things and just do what I say, but that you have compassion, and that you have empathy for what they've gone through, and that God purposely put you in their path so that you can help them overcome this, and they can feel the compassion of the Lord through your guidance.
Yes, and through your story.
Yes.
So one of my other questions was, how can we live as leaders and guides in the lives of others? Like, how do we do that? Like, you kind of have been touching on this, but basically we live by an example to help people through their own story, and help them, like, where do they want to land the plane? So are those conversations that you have with your kids? Do you talk to them about, like, living intentionally yet? Or because your kids are older than mine. So do you have that opportunity yet? Like, how does that look?
Yeah. So I would say probably my kids are not always a fan of that, because I'm always like, well, where do you think this is going to, my daughter's 13, my son is 9. And so they're not necessarily thinking of that. However, I will say, after years, especially with my daughter, because she's entering high school and this next year, and I'm seeing her really start to process information slower than probably what's normal for her age. So, example, she will process information before making a decision. How is this going to impact? What do you think about this? Because I've spoken that over her and my son for a long time. So they're always thinking ahead a little bit about what is this fruit of this decision? And as a mom, you see them also make really poor decisions and just random things that you're like, I knew that wasn't going to work, but they had to get through it, And so practically, I think always speaking about, I think about how Jesus really asked a lot of questions with his disciples. And so he asked questions, so we get to ask questions with our kids, or even ones that we're leading in an organization or business or ministry, is, where do you see that? Kind of not turning it back on them in a manipulative way, but just getting them to process and slow down, so that they can start to understand the questions they then need to ask as they get more independent. I want to ask those questions, as if I'm speaking for my daughter, I'm going to ask those questions as I get older. I see her asking questions that I've asked her,
So good.
And so just slowing down that process and helping them see the questions they need to ask to get to where they want to go.
I think that's so good, man. Just asking the questions so that we basically, identify where we want to go, where we want to land the plane, and then how do we ask the right questions to get there? And I just think that that's so important because it's not really something I always think about the process, like how this is where I want to go, but are you asking the right questions to get there?
Right.
Are you asking God? Are you asking yourself? Are you asking your family? I mean, it's just like, it's so important. I've mentioned this a couple of times, but someone took us through an exercise a few years ago of setting out a 90-year plan. And I was just like, at first, completely overwhelmed by this because I was like, am I going to be here in 90 years? But the idea is basically, you want your 3 or 5 year plan, but then what do you want out of this decade and this decade? And it really gave me this perspective of how little time I have left because I don't have 90 years. And then also even how little time we have with our kids. Like I was like, we've kind of had the dream of like doing national parks and stuff, which we've not even started. And I'm like, Arabella is now 8 years old. If we don't do this in the next 10 years, there's no guarantee that she's going to be in the house. So it's like, if something's important to me of landing her plane, of that role, of giving her that experience, I better start working towards it now. So what decisions do I need to make to do that now? I was going to mention, I've been exploring a group called Classical Conversations. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's a homeschool group. And the lady who founded it, her name is Leah Bortons. I hope I'm saying that right. But someone shared a story with me that when she would go in to look for curriculum for her kids or books, that she didn't pay attention to the age her kids currently were. She paid attention to like those advanced ages of where the books that were now dumped them to, because she basically wanted to see where they're going.
Yes.
And it was so more important to look at the end first and then say, okay, this is the beginning that I want, and to identify that. And I just thought that was such an important principle of, choosing. It's why we choose our friends and our relationships and all of those things, because they influence our final destination. Yes. They influence your life path. So do you choose friendships and relationships that challenge you, that spur you forward? And I think that's a complicated subject right now. Like at our age, I don't know, I mean, I had a conversation recently with a friend and I was surprised about, I think like the isolation and loneliness our generation may feel. I felt like it's a very broad thing of like, we are not necessarily nurturing super healthy community. I don't know, maybe that's just where we're all at, but I just was like, yeah, I feel like this is a problem, is that we're all so busy, so caught up in our lives that we don't necessarily check on our friends. We don't necessarily check on our community. And I don't have the answer for that yet. I feel like I'm very inward focused on our kids and our family right now. So I get it. But when you're asking yourself, where do I want to land this plane? Like, what about all those relationships?
Yes, that's such a good point, because I think when you have kids that are your age, your kid's age or my kid's age, everything kind of becomes about the kid. And so when they leave the house or they grow up or they're driving and they're doing their own thing, where does that leave you? And so to think about that with your spouse and to think about that with the Lord, of asking, what relationships do you want me to sow into? Yeah. And who do you want me to reach out to today? And it could just be, you always have those friends that when you see them, it's like no time has passed, and just checking in with them. But eventually the kids are going to leave, and what do you do then?
I'm going to cry.
Right. Right. And so because if we're going through that, other parents are as well. Yeah. And so to know, just to have somebody call and check in or text or something can be just that seed that they need to know and to hear that day. Yeah. That helps them and is a seed for later when you get to really experience them in a different way, in a relationship, in a friendship. Yeah.
Yeah. A few podcasts ago, we covered like some of the top 5 regrets of people who are dying. And one of them was that they didn't nurture relationships. And I think it can expand to family and to friends, but it's like we don't make a good destination. We just let it happen. Yeah. We let life happen instead of living intentionally with our relationships. Okay, just a couple more questions, but one would be, what are obstacles someone might face trying to live intentionally? I'm trying to determine where I want to land this plane in whatever area, whether it's as a mom or a wife, as someone in leadership. I mean, what challenges might they face, and how would you encourage them to kind of overcome that?
I think that the challenge is always going to be related to to the destination, really. I mean, as a mom, you're going to doubt, am I doing enough? Am I raising them up in the word enough? You're always going to ask, am I enough? And we know that that question is not from the Lord. We know it's from the enemy or from our flesh. And so to identify those obstacles is what are, again, I'm a journaler, I write. And so I journal a lot, and I will write down all the questions that are running through my head, that when I get anxious, when I can't sleep, or when, my stomach's, upset, what are the things, again, I've said this a lot, but I ask the Lord a lot of questions, and I will write down those questions or those words that I hear that are really, when I think about it, I'm like, I'm stuck. Why am I stuck? Yeah. And those are the problems that you process with the Lord and that you can overcome. And sometimes it's a season. Sometimes it's a while. If you're praying for your spouse and you're like, Lord, I'm not seeing this. I'm not seeing this. And you said, and your word says. Yeah. And I think it kind of goes back to what you said earlier about challenges versus opportunities, the giants versus, and look at what the Lord has done and look at what he has brought you through. Yeah. Will help overcome some of those obstacles. But really writing down all those thoughts, the enemy really doesn't want you to even get out, because if he can cause confusion in the mind, then he has, hold on something. And so if you can write down those thoughts, get out those thoughts, talk to somebody about those things that are running through your mind, like, am I enough? Or I have a fear of man versus a fear of the Lord. Or, I'm worried that my kids are going to go astray, when there's no evidence of that at all. So, I've talked to one of my close friends, and she had said, just keep praying into it. Every time there's an obstacle or a what if or a fear, pray into what God has for them. Yeah. And I think that's something, even in leadership, even when you're leading other people, in leadership, you can start to see people where God's taking them, even if they can't. Yeah. And so whether they know it or not, pray into that and ask the Lord to give you wisdom on how to take them there and how to guide them there.
I think that's so important. And I love that you keep reiterating asking the questions, because I don't know that if you're truly asking questions, it means you're listening.
Yes.
And that's the important part, is like, are you asking the right questions so that you can listen to the answer and then apply it? And like that listening heart and that posture. I just think that's so important. So I think today we've really talked about like that kind of that your true identity, your core desire, and realizing that we wear those hats and those roles as mothers, as friends, as daughters, as wives, as women in leadership, whatever it is, there's a core desire for us serving in that capacity. I mean, you're a working mom, you're a wife, you understand, like I sometimes feel conflicted, like, what hat am I wearing? Where am I? There's a lot of pull, but it's like, what is your core desire in serving in that role? And I can even link some of it back. Like we have 3 kids and I'm working, and sometimes I feel like, am I doing the kids a disservice? Am I not present enough? And I try my best just to be a lesson I learned, it's something I read years ago, just be where my feet are and be present when I'm at home and be present when I'm at work. But one of my biggest desires, like for Arabella, has been to show her that you can still fulfill a call, an assignment on your life as a woman, as a mom, as a wife, and that you can do whatever God asks you to do. You can't take on outside the scope, but whatever that destination that God has, that he has given you the capacity. And I think it's just like so important to remain encouraged in that. I told Paul the other day, I talked to someone just kind of about some situations we're walking through, and she just like grilled me and asked all the questions and basically just kind of brought up all the inner insecurities that I have. And she's not wrong, but it was just not what I needed to hear. And I don't know this personal, but I just like walked away from the conversation. I told Paul, I was like, I do not like her. She is just like speaking like those inner doubts. Yeah. And then the next day I talked to someone else about the situation that kind of got passed on through a channel. And she said, well, you sound like you're a high capacity woman and you're able to accomplish what the Lord has laid before you. And I was like, thank you. Like
Yes.
that's what I needed to hear. But it
Yeah.
was like, they're both right in their way, but like, how can we encourage women,
Mm-hmm.
encourage moms and
Mm-hmm.
wives to be at high capacity? And I think one of the biggest things is know where you're going.
Yep. Know where you're going.
With your kids, with your family, with your spouse, with your spiritual life, and recognize that you can like live in intentionally and those setting those goals. I think that's one thing that's really impressive to me about the StoryBrand framework is like, when you achieve the goal because you clearly state it.
Right.
You clarify your message.
Yes. Yes.
So
exactly.
all right. Anything else you want to add to this?
No, I mean, we could probably talk for hours about it, but it's good. It's good. Just look for Jesus in everything and ask him all the questions.
Yeah.
Where do you want me to land this plane, Lord?
Yes. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Shannon. Thank you for being here. It has just been an honor and a privilege to have this conversation. We have been through a lot of transition together over the years, and your gift of identifying the desired destination, identifying the core desire is like, I just felt it's just been really resonating with me. Part of the transition that we've gone through as an organization over the last year, when we tried to set our goals this year, it was kind of like a little gray and murky. It was just kind of wonky. It's like we had just come out of so much. I was like, how do we know where we're going? There's been a lot of refinement. And so then it's like, okay, let's pause for a second. Let's work on our 10-year goals, our 3-year goals, so that we can back into a healthy 1-year goal. But I realized that all of that began speaking into what you've been talking about where do you want to land the plane? And so as we ask ourselves, my encouragement to those who are listening is, even when you come out of those seasons, we just came out of one as an organization where transition made goals and things murky. And it kind of feels like you're a little bit in like survival mode and Band-Aid mode and just like day to day. And that's okay, but it's not okay to stay there.
Right.
And like, that's what I've been telling our team. Like, we are no longer putting out a fire. We are no longer in reaction. We are in growth mode. We are going to take the promised land. How are we going to do that? What's the desired destination? Where are we going to land this plane? And I just feel like for us as women, knowing that as where we want to land the plane as moms, wives, our spiritual lives, our leaders, as our health, like making those clear and defined goals, setting those intentions is so important. And I just really appreciate you speaking into that today. So
thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. So for everyone listening today, I hope that you will walk away and clarify that destination, maybe just in one area of your life. Just give it a try. Maybe it's as a mom, maybe it's a wife, maybe it's your spiritual life, maybe it's your health life. And remember that you want to identify as, I am a good mom. And because I am a good mom, and because I'm a spiritual mom, then this is where I want my kids to land the plane. And recognize that that's going to happen. Like as a leader, as a person taking your leader, you're a guide in your child's life, you're taking them to this intended destination. So the question becomes like, where do you want them to be? And I know for me, like with our kids, my desire that I pray for them is that they would know the Father and that they would always chase hard after what the Father has for them. And I tell them every night, you are able to do anything that God assigns you to. Whatever it is, you are more than capable. He has gifted you, that you are born leaders, that there's much to be stirred up inside of you, and that you're going to fulfill the destiny that's written in your books. And as a mom, I recognize that sometimes that could mean detours, but it doesn't have to be. I think our generation we've experienced so much where there always has to be like this falling away and this return to, I don't believe that it has to be that. That wasn't my story, so that doesn't have to be your story for your kids. And I think if you can focus on the destination of what's really important, if when your kids leave, you want them to have a strong spiritual life, then you got to start prioritizing the spiritual things, which means you're going to have to sacrifice some other things. We're in the process, I want to do an episode on it later, but trying to define our family core values. And like even saying, okay, this is what's most important to us. This is what we identify. This is our family motto. And because of that, we do these things. And sometimes we don't get to do these other things. But I think when you can identify what really matters, what's most important, that's what's going to help you ask the questions to get to the destination where you want to land that plane where you want to go. You don't want to get on a plane going to Atlanta if you're trying to go to Dallas. So make sure you're on the right plane and you're on the right path and it's not too late to correct it. Thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to being with you again next week, same time, same place.